In 2046, imagine looking back on your working years and realizing you never built a retirement account. No 401k, no long term savings. Not because you were careless, but because you believed it wouldn't be necessary. Technology handles productivity. Machines did most of the work. Income and essential services were simply there when needed. That future wasn't described as science fiction. It was predicted earlier this year by Elon Musk, speaking in January on the Moonshots with Peter Diamandis podcast. He suggested that advances in artificial intelligence energy and robotics will create so much abundance that saving for retirement in 10 or 20 years will become irrelevant. Now contrast that with life today. Inflation has reshaped household budgets. Interest rates remain elevated. Housing insurance and healthcare costs keep rising. Even people earning more than they did a decade ago often feel less secure, not more. The future sounds effortless. The present feels expensive. Musk's words carry weight for a reason. He's a billionaire who has already delivered projects many once thought impossible: reusable rockets, mass market electric vehicles, and global satellite networks. That track record explains why his statement sparked serious debate, but it also raises a practical question: when predictions don't arrive on schedule, who absorbs the risk in the meantime? I'm Alex. Today, we'll break this down in layers, starting with the claim itself, then the reality of technological transitions, and finally, how to think about your future without betting everything on one outcome. Let's start with what was actually said and why it divided opinion so quickly. Musk's claim: retirement saving will become irrelevant. Elon Musk recently said that saving for retirement won't matter in 10 or 20 years. His reasoning is simple and bold. Advances in artificial intelligence, energy, and robotics will push productivity so high that scarcity disappears. In that world, traditional money planning fades into the background. He describes a future where machines do most of the work, goods and services are abundant, and income becomes almost universal. Medical care improves dramatically. Education becomes free. People can learn anything instantly. From that angle, setting aside money for decades from now feels outdated, almost unnecessary. This idea lands differently depending on where you sit. If you're in your 40s, contributing to a 401k every paycheck, it sounds tempting. Why keep tightening your budget if technology is about to rewrite the rules? Why delay life today for a future that might not even resemble the past? But notice the contrast. While this vision points to abundance tomorrow, today's reality looks very different. Housing costs are up. Insurance premiums climb every year. Interest rates remain elevated. Many households feel more squeezed now than they did 5 years ago, even with higher incomes. That tension is the hook, a future where money doesn't matter, colliding with a present where money matters more than ever. And between those two realities sits a decision most people don't realize they're making yet. Why experts urge skepticism. Financial experts reacted to Musk's claim with the same response they've learned to keep over decades: slow down. Not because technology won't advance, but because forecasts rarely arrive cleanly or on schedule. 50 years ago, people expected flying cars by now. Instead, we got traffic apps and higher insurance premiums. History shows a pattern. Big breakthroughs arrive unevenly. Some industries benefit fast. Others lag. Some workers see opportunity. Others face displacement first. The gap between prediction and lived experience is usually wider than expected, and that gap is where households get hurt. Look at recent examples. Remote work promised flexibility and freedom. It delivered layoffs, offshoring, and intense competition for fewer, high-paying roles. Online education was supposed to lower costs. Tuition kept rising anyway. Even automation in logistics and retail hasn't lowered prices as much as hoped. It mostly shifted margins. Another concern is timing. Transitions don't wait until you're ready. They happen while mortgages still need paying, kids still need tuition, and healthcare bills still show up every month. Middle-income families tend to absorb the shock first, long before benefits spread evenly. That's why experts warn against changing long-term planning based on future certainty. Not because abundance is impossible, but because betting your entire future on a smooth transition assumes something history almost never delivers. AI transitions could increase, not reduce risk. Technology rarely lowers risk right away. It usually reshapes who carries it. When AI tools spread, companies don't pause to protect households, they optimize. Jobs change faster than pay structures. Skills become outdated before mortgages do. We're already seeing this. AI copilots boost productivity, but headcounts don't grow with output. Entry-level roles disappear first. Mid-career workers feel pressure next. Even high earners face volatility as contract work replaces stable positions. Income becomes less predictable, not more. The promise is long-term efficiency. The reality is short-term unevenness. During transitions, prices don't fall evenly either. Healthcare costs rise despite better tech. Housing remains scarce, even with smarter construction. Insurance premiums climb as risk models update faster than wages. Here's the quiet risk most people miss. When systems change quickly, safety nets lag. Benefits tied to employment weaken. Retraining takes time. Markets reprice expectations overnight. If your finances rely on steady assumptions, small disruptions compound fast. That's why saving matters most during change, not after it settles. Liquidity absorbs shocks. Cash flow buys time. Optionality keeps you from making forced decisions at the worst moment. The same technology that promises abundance can quietly increase personal risk, especially before the upside reaches everyone. Homeownership and equity as stability. One asset behaves very differently during uncertainty the place you live. When you've built equity or paid off your home, you're not guessing what your biggest monthly expense will be next year. You already own it. That matters more than most people realize. Rent adjusts with markets. Mortgages eventually disappear. Owning your home converts a volatile cost into a fixed one and then into none at all. That's not a theory. It's cash flow math. Look at recent years. Housing prices jumped, rents surged, property taxes rose. Yet homeowners with low balances felt far less pressure than renters, whose payments reset every lease. Even with higher taxes, the gap widened. Stability quietly favored ownership. Equity also creates leverage without urgency. It gives options. You can refinance, downsize, rent a portion, or simply stay put with lower stress. That flexibility isn't about speculation, it's about control. No algorithm replaces that. Here's the contrast worth sitting with. AI promises abundance someday. Home equity delivers predictability today. One is a forecast, the other is a balance sheet fact. In periods of rapid change, stability becomes a hidden advantage. When income fluctuates and systems adjust, owning your largest expense keeps small shocks from turning into permanent damage. And that kind of resilience doesn't depend on the future arriving on schedule. The shift away from pensions. Retirement didn't always work this way. For decades, pensions absorbed uncertainty. Some retirees lived longer than expected, others didn't. The risk was shared across millions of workers and years of contributions. Individuals didn't have to model longevity or market timing on their own. That system is mostly gone. Today, retirement risk sits squarely with the individual. Life expectancy is longer, careers are less linear, markets move faster, and the responsibility to fund 20 or 30 years without a paycheck now falls on personal savings and investment decisions. You can see the shift in real numbers. Fewer private sector workers have pensions. Most rely on 401ks and IRAs, where outcomes depend on contribution rates, market cycles, and timing. Two people with the same income can retire with radically different results, based on behavior, not benefits. Here's the quiet problem. Longevity risk compounds invisibly. Outliving savings doesn't announce itself at 65. It shows up slowly at 78 when earning options narrow and expenses, especially healthcare, don't. That's why the old assumptions no longer hold. In a pension world, saving felt optional. In today's system, it's structural. The transition already happened quietly, and it changed the math long before AI entered the conversation. Consequences of not saving enough. Running out of savings doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels like an adjustment. You delay travel. You cut back on hobbies. You tell yourself you'll work a few more years. The loss of choice happens quietly. By the time it becomes obvious, the options are limited. Without sufficient savings, retirement stops being a decision and becomes a constraint. You either keep working often longer than your energy or health prefers, or you accept a lower standard of living than planned. This shows up clearly in real life. Older workers staying in physically demanding jobs longer than expected. Retirees returning to part-time work not for purpose, but necessity. Fixed incomes colliding with rising healthcare premiums, property taxes, and insurance costs. What's often missed is the psychological cost. Financial pressure narrows thinking. It reduces flexibility just when life becomes less predictable. Medical events, family needs, or market downturns hit harder because there's no margin. Here's the uncomfortable contrast. Technology may increase productivity overall, but it doesn't restore lost autonomy at 72. Once time becomes the constraint, money determines dignity. And at that stage, the absence of savings isn't just a financial issue. It's a loss of control that no future breakthrough can retroactively fix. Planning for an uncertain future. Planning for retirement today isn't about predicting breakthroughs. It's about assuming life stays expensive longer than expected. Higher taxes, higher insurance, higher healthcare costs. Those trends haven't reversed even during periods of rapid innovation. Most planners now assume retirement lasts 25 to 35 years. That's not pessimism. It's math. People live longer, and medical care, even when better, tends to cost more, not less. Waiting for technology to fix affordability has rarely worked in the past. The practical shift is subtle but important. Planning now focuses less on perfect forecasts and more on resilience. Can your finances handle higher costs than expected? Can they absorb a few bad years without forcing decisions? Can you adapt if work income becomes uneven? This is where controllable factors matter. Savings you can access, investments spread across different risks, assets that don't all depend on the same outcome. These aren't exciting ideas, but they age well. Here's the contrast worth remembering. Uncertainty punishes precision. It rewards flexibility. Planning for the future isn't about getting the future right. It's about staying stable if the future arrives late. Uneven or not at all. The asymmetry of preparation. There's a simple imbalance most people overlook. If you keep saving and the future becomes abundant, nothing breaks. You're still fine. If you stop saving and that future arrives late or unevenly, the damage is permanent. That's the asymmetry. Preparation has limited downside and massive upside. Non-preparation is the opposite. It works only if everything goes right on time and for everyone. History doesn't support that bet. Look at recent shocks. Inflation arrived faster than expected. Interest rates jumped. Asset prices swung hard. People with savings adjusted. People without it had no room. The same event produced very different outcomes, not because of intelligence, but because of positioning. This is why savings function less like a forecast and more like insurance. You don't buy insurance because you're sure something bad will happen. You buy it because the cost of being wrong is too high. Here's the quiet insight. Betting on abundance requires certainty. Preparing for uncertainty doesn't. One path assumes the future cooperates. The other assumes it won't and builds room anyway. If the optimistic vision turns out to be right, savers don't lose freedom. They gain options sooner. And if it doesn't, they're the ones who still get to choose while others are forced to react. Why billionaires can afford to be wrong. When someone worth hundreds of billions talks about the future, the personal risk behind their advice is almost non-existent. If their prediction is early late or flat out wrong, their lifestyle doesn't change. Their safety net isn't a retirement account, it's scale. Extreme wealth turns uncertainty into optionality. A billionaire doesn't need the future to arrive smoothly. They can pivot, or buy their way through disruption. If markets swing or jobs disappear, it's background noise. For most households, it's a crisis. This gap matters because advice carries hidden assumptions. Telling people not to save assumes access to capital influence and fallback options. It assumes mistakes are reversible. For middle-income families, they aren't. One wrong decade compounds fast. You can see this difference in behavior. Wealthy founders diversify across companies' assets and jurisdictions. They don't bet everything on a single outcome. Yet their public comments often sound like certainty, not hedging. Here's the contrast. When someone with unlimited margin talks about abundance, they're describing a world where downside doesn't apply to them. For everyone else, the downside is the story. And that's why borrowing confidence from people who can afford to be wrong is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. What abundance still can't replace. Even in a world of abundance, money doesn't disappear, it changes roles. It stops being about buying more things and becomes about controlling your time. No amount of cheap goods replaces the ability to say no. Look at how people actually retire well today. It's not because they consume endlessly, it's because they decide when to work, where to live, and how to handle surprises. That control still comes from assets, not promises. Technology can lower the cost of services, but it doesn't eliminate dependence. Healthcare may improve, but someone still pays for access. Housing may get smarter, but land stays scarce. Even with automation, taxes, insurance, and maintenance don't vanish. They just evolve. There's also something abundance doesn't solve: timing. You don't need freedom eventually. You need it when life happens, when health changes, family needs shift, or work stops making sense. Those moments don't wait for utopian systems to mature. Here's the quiet truth: financial independence isn't about fearing scarcity, it's about preserving agency. Savings and ownership buy options long before they buy comfort. And no matter how advanced technology becomes, the ability to choose your life on your schedule remains something you still have to own. Preparing for the future without predicting it. Preparing well doesn't require guessing how fast AI advances or when abundance arrives. It requires accepting that the future rarely unfolds cleanly. Transitions stall, policies lag, costs rise in places no one forecasted. The mistake most people make is waiting for clarity. They want certainty before acting, but clarity usually arrives after the window to prepare has closed. By then, flexibility is gone. The more reliable approach is positioning, staying liquid enough to absorb shocks, owning assets that reduce fixed expenses, building buffers that give you time to react instead of forcing decisions under pressure. These aren't predictions, they're defenses. You can see the difference during every disruption. Some people pause, reassess, and adjust. Others scramble. The dividing line isn't intelligence or optimism, it's margin. Financial margin turns surprises into inconveniences instead of crises. Here's the quiet reframing: preparing for the future isn't about fearing change, it's about refusing to be cornered by it. You don't save because you distrust progress. You save because progress doesn't arrive evenly, and life doesn't pause while systems catch up. If abundance shows up sooner than expected, preparation doesn't trap you. It accelerates freedom. And if it doesn't, you've already built the one advantage that works in every future: the ability to choose. Key takeaways: the debate isn't really about whether technology will improve life. It's about who carries risk while waiting for that improvement to arrive. History shows that progress is real, but uneven, delayed, and disruptive along the way. When systems change, households without margin feel it first. Saving isn't a bet against abundance. It's a way to preserve choice while the future sorts itself out. Assets, equity, and liquidity don't predict outcomes, they absorb shocks. They turn volatility into inconvenience instead of catastrophe. The most important shift is mental. Retirement planning isn't about hoarding money for some distant age. It's about maintaining agency across decades of uncertainty. The people who navigate change best aren't the most optimistic or the most fearful. They're the ones positioned to adapt. If this way of thinking resonates, keep it in mind as you look at the next financial decision you make, not as a tactic, but as a filter for staying flexible in a world that rarely moves on schedule.